Great. Well, open their mics too, because I'd like to have them introduce themselves also.
Hi, I'm Sophie. I'm in 9th grade.
Well, welcome, Sophie. Very happy to have you here. And Teresa?
Well, hi, my name is Teresa, and I'm a 10th grader.
And what grade are you in, Teresa?
I'm in 10th grade.
Oh, great. Terrific. And Robert?
I'm Robert, and I'm a 10th grader.
You're what? 7th?
I'm a 10th grader.
10th grader. Terrific. You're an old man. And Ari?
So, hello, my name is Ari. I'm in 7th grade.
Terrific. And Gabrielle?
Hi, I'm Gabrielle, and I'm in 8th grade.
Terrific. I think that's probably everybody. Is there yeah, I think that is anyway. If there's anyone else, please speak up. Well, I'm so happy you are here. I'm sorry for the delay, but you know, these things happen. My name is John Senna, and I am a professor of English at Ohio State University. We are the largest university in the country. We have 60,000 full-time students on one campus. I hope one of you will decide to come here. I got my degrees in teaching and in literature and English from Princeton University. I'm a PhD from Princeton University. I've been an English professor teaching writing and literature for 35 years. And I've written a lot of stuff. And I also was one of the writers for the Scholastic Aptitude Test. That is the the SAT. That was one of the things that I did for many years, and I still work on it. I know that's something that you're going to have to confront one of these days, and we can talk about that, at some other time, perhaps. Well, let's see. I see. I can get off this screen. I wanted to talk about a little bit more about our methodology. Let's see. Share. Let me. Okay. Yeah. Our objective is to learn how to write effectively, clearly, logically, and coherently. And it's challenging. When you speak to someone, there are all sorts of ways that you can convey your meaning. What you do with your eyes, what you do with your hands, your facial gestures, your body gestures, your tone of voice. There are many ways of conveying meaning when we're talking to people. That's easy. Writing is much more difficult because it's just using your words and there's no place to hide. It's just you and your words and your ideas. And so it's a much more difficult, but I think wonderful form of communication because it also helps you in your thinking. One of the things I want to talk to you about is that writing is more than just communicating. It's the ability to think logically and to think clearly and to think effectively. That is, as you write about a topic, you start to define it more in your mind. You start to analyze it. You start to look at nuances and shades of meaning. And suddenly you find that you really understand the idea much better than you would have if you didn't try to write about it. So we're going to spend most of our time writing. I mean, I think of what is the best way to learn writing. It's by writing and having an instructor to help critique what you write, but also by simply writing. And let me also say that writing is difficult. If I can have the next slide, perhaps. Let's see. Think of it in terms of playing a musical instrument. If you play the guitar or the piano or the violin, you can't cram for that. It's not like studying for a math exam or a vocabulary test. You're talking about a process and learning how to play a musical instrument. Writing is very much like that. It's a process, and you learn simply by doing it over and over again. And think of how frustrating it was when you were trying to learn an instrument or learn to type. And you had to keep looking at where your fingers were and what keys they were on. But then one day, your fingers automatically went to the right key. And that's what I want to have happen with us. That is, we're going to keep practicing and writing and improving and looking at our mistakes, looking at the good things and the bad things. And eventually, you're going to feel very comfortable, I think, writing. And to help that happen, we're going to have an essay each week, and I'll then critique it very carefully and send it back to you. I also have created a little grammar punctuation booklet, which is part of your online resource. What I did was, over my years of teaching, to take the most common grammatical mistakes, the most common punctuation mistakes. That is, I think probably 90% of the mistakes that are made in writing, and I'm talking about now the mechanics of writing, about 90% of them are probably in my little booklet, because it's based on years and years of what mistakes do students most often make. I didn't put in there anything that happens once every 2 years. There's some very abstract, difficult grammatical form or rule. I left those out. I hope you can use this booklet as a resource here with our classes, but also as a resource in high school and college. And I've had students do that. Punctuation grammar doesn't change. You can, with a 14-page booklet, quickly find an example of what it is that you're looking for, what kind of answer you're confronting, rather than getting a grammar book and looking through hundreds of pages, and they're all a little different too. So I hope you'll be able to use this booklet. And then we will also, well, not tonight, but we will be using it, reading it in class to go over some grammatical issues. And let's see, my next is, okay, we're going to write over the next few weeks different types of essays. The first is a narrative essay, and we're going to do that for the next class. It is a personal essay about you. It's about something you've experienced, something you've done. It's personal, but it has to have a point to it. Like, let's say I really thought I was going to fail at something, but yet I worked hard at it and discovered that if you work hard, you won't fail. That is, it has to have some kind of a point to it, but it is a personal essay about you. Another type we're going to be doing is what I call a critical analysis. That is, we'll take a topic and you will then discuss it. So let's say global warming, is it a problem? And you'd write an essay on global warming. The internet, is it a problem for students, or is it good or bad for students? And you'll write about that. A persuasive essay, that is trying to persuade someone to your point of view. For instance, you might want to write that all cell phones should be prohibited at school. And then there's a descriptive essay, and that's where you can use more creative language than the narrative essay and talk about other topics. Now, of all those types of essays, the critical analysis and persuasive essays are the ones that you're going to probably do most in high school and college. Really, almost all of them will be that. Your narrative essay, though, is important in that when you apply for a school, if you're going to a private, let's say you want to apply for a private high school or to college, you're going to have to be able to always ask you about yourself, to write an essay about yourself, what makes you the person you are. And that's where that kind of essay, the narrative essay, will come in very handy. And listen, I want you to ask questions. I know students often don't like to ask questions, or they don't want to stick their necks out. Well, you're not sticking your neck out. If something is unclear to you, then it's probably unclear to other people as well. So please ask, whatever question you want. We're all here to learn, not to make judgments about each other. So, are there any questions so far?
I don't have a question, but
Sure.
just to let you know, I have something at 6:30, so I have to leave around like 6:10.
Oh, sure. I understand that. And I know you're all very busy people, and thank you for telling me that, Sophie. Okay, now let's see if I can get my next one up. No, can't do that. Okay. Here is, Leslie, let's go beyond that, that one, okay? Let's go beyond to the next one. Thank you. This is sort of in general an outline of what an essay is or how it's constructed. You start with an introductory paragraph, the first paragraph, which is usually very short, and it tells people what the topic is, what it is you are doing. It's very important to have a very clear statement of your theme, your purpose, your point, whatever you want to call that. Do you ever get emails and you read, the first 2 or 3 paragraphs of the email and you don't know what it's about? even, you get to the end of the email, maybe you're not sure what the point of all this was, or when you learn what the point of it is, let's say in the third paragraph, you then have to go back to the beginning so everything makes sense. Well, we don't want that to happen in our writing. So we want to make sure it's very clear in that first paragraph what the topic is. And for instance, I put there in that first bullet, I wish to propose that all nations work to reduce global warming. Now, that's a clear statement, isn't it, of what you want this paper to be. No one can misunderstand that. There's no confusion. You've oriented the reader. I want to talk about that nations should work together to reduce global warming. But now, let's be a little more sophisticated in our writing. You could just make that statement, but it's better writing if you can kind of glide into that statement. That is, if you can kind of prepare the reader for that statement. So let's go to the second bullet. As I said, that was a little unsophisticated. No, the second bullet. Go back to where we were, the screen that we were on. Yeah. For instance, in the second bullet, scientists report that our oceans are rising every year. We can see longer and hotter summers. I wish to propose that all nations work together to reduce global warming. Can you see what we've done? We've talked about the thesis. We mentioned the thesis, but we kind of got into it in a smooth fashion by saying some general truths, like, it's clear from our climate that the summers are hotter. It's clear that the oceans are rising. I wish to propose that all nations work to reduce global warming. So, we can do, you got into the topic, but in a kind of easy way. If we go to the next slide. See, now the rest of your paper is the content, what it is that you're going to write about. Now, the basic building block of any kind of essay is the paragraph. One thing, or a couple of things, two things you want to remember about paragraphs. One is that each paragraph should have only one idea. Okay, and the very first sentence of the paragraph, they call that the topic sentence, T-O-P-I-C, the topic sentence. That sentence should be what the paragraph is going to be about. Okay, so let's say that the first sentence on this global warming paper, that the first sentence is temperatures are rising in Asia. Okay, now that paragraph can only talk about temperatures in Asia. You can't, in that paragraph, then talk about temperatures in the United States. That would have to be a different paragraph. That is, each paragraph is one idea, and that's where you get your stepping stones to make your case, to make your point. You go from one idea to the next idea to the next idea. So if you said, for instance, a very fashionable color for ladies' fashions this year is blue. If that is the topic sentence, the first sentence of a paragraph, then you couldn't talk about green being popular too. If you say it's blue, then if that's your topic sentence, and you only can talk about blue in that paragraph. So sometimes you want to use a fairly general topic sentence so that you aren't sort of narrowed or caught too close together. Let's see the next slide, please. Okay. Okay, so let's say the topic sentence of a paragraph is that first sentence. Let's look at another example. Quote, there are videos of melting icebergs. Let's say that's the first sentence of a paragraph. So you're writing this paper on why nations should join together to stop global warming. Now here's one paragraph you started with, there are videos of melting icebergs. The reader then knows from that what that paragraph is going to be about, right? It's going to be about images of melting icebergs. You can't suddenly talk in that paragraph about ships at sea, or what's happening with the rising water in Miami Beach. It has to be about videos in that paragraph. So again, that first sentence controls what that paragraph is going to be about. Okay. Can I get the next one? Okay, now your concluding paragraph. And again, in your last paragraph, you don't want to re-argue the whole paper. I mean, that's pointless. You just want to kind of summarize what you've said with an ending. I mean, let's pull everything together. So for instance, look in that first bullet point. Global warming is a fact. We can see it in news stories, on TV, and in our lives. And I hope we all work together to stop it. That would be your conclusion. Or sometimes ending with a good quote is appropriate. For instance, Al Gore said, he wrote about global warming. If we do not act now, it will soon be too late. That is, the ending is, say, not a restatement of the whole paper, but just sort of a summary in a couple of sentences of what you've written about. Now, where do you get information from? You get it from yourself, really. Everything you've ever seen, heard, thought, done, everything in your lifetime is deep within you. You might not be able to consciously draw it up very quickly, but it's there. Think of yourself as a great resource, or a great computer disk, or a great computer file that has enormous amounts of information. Again, everything you've ever seen, heard, read, experienced, it's all there. And I think the difference between really smart people and the rest of us is that they know how to pull it up quicker, but it's there. And I want you to do is then give yourself time to get that information to the surface. So let's say you are going to write a paper about global warming. Okay, I'd like you to try to do is sit in front of your computer and just brainstorm. Write down every idea you have about the topic. You might say, well, gee, my summers are hotter. I mean, that's pretty obvious where I'm living. My summers are hotter. You write that down. I've heard that the oceans are getting higher. You write that. I saw on a broadcast pictures of icebergs melting and just falling into the sea. Write that down. We've had a lot of fires in California this summer, and that is because of a very dry climate that creates conditions for fires. So you write that down. So what you're doing now is you're getting your ideas down on the screen. You're looking at them. Now, you don't have to worry about spelling or grammar at this point. You're just getting the ideas down. And the ideas, once you start to think of it, more and more ideas will pop into your mind. I mean, that's the way our mind works. You have a lot of information about global warming that you don't even know you have. And you get all these ideas down, then you start to think of them as part of the paper. Okay, so what would go in the first paragraph? What would go in the second paragraph? What would go in the third paragraph? These brainstorming ideas you've had are the content of your paper, really. But don't try to make sure the spelling or grammar is right. Just get them down. Even if we don't go back over to make the spelling correct. Just get the ideas down. You know what they are, so that you can then start to work with them. You're really going to edit them out of existence, but in order to have something there to edit, you have to get them on the screen. Maybe my next slide. Thank you. So that's your rough draft. You just, again, one idea per paper. Then you do this and you go over that rough draft, you improve it, you check the grammar, you check the punctuation, and you hope you can use my grammar book that I got for you to do that. Think of writing as a process of writing and writing and writing some more. It's like, again, I compare it to learning to play the violin or learning a language even. You only do it by practicing. And the more you practice, the better you're going to get. But I want you to also have realistic expectations of yourselves. Writing is hard. It's not easy. And so don't be discouraged if it takes some time before it all starts to fit together and make sense. Okay, so let's see. Let's see, can we get the next slide? Okay, now the first thing I'm going to have you write is the narrative essay. Are there any questions, by the way, so far? Anything we said about the sort of the process of writing and the structure of a paper? And now, a narrative essay is an essay that tells a story about you. It could be about your relationship with your parents, your relationship with a sibling, your relationship with a teacher, but it's your story, a personal experience. But it has to have a point. That is, at some point, usually toward the end, you draw an observation for what did I learn about this from this experience? What did it help me do? And this is the kind of essay, as I said, that when you're applying for admission to schools or being hired for a job, This is the kind of personal essay people often ask for because they want to know more about you. And generally, when you're writing this, you follow the event in chronological order. As you start at the beginning of whatever this observation is, this event, this experience, and you go until it's over. Now, I want to give you some examples of that. And let's talk about these examples. I want to get your opinions too, okay? I'm going to give you an example of a short narrative essay that responds to the prompt, write about an experience where you learned something about yourself. Write about an experience where you learned something about yourself. Okay, so that's the topic of this next essay. And let's say, could I have the essay, Morgan? Okay, so let's read it together. The topic is, then that's not the topic, it's the title, Always Keep an Open Mind. Okay, so let's look at it. Since elementary school, now that's a little introductory phrase, so you put a comma after it. See, since elementary school, I have always favored subjects like science and math over the humanities. The humanities are English, history, political science. So what is that topic sentence? I have always favored subjects like science and math over the humanities. So the person then, in the rest of the paragraph, if it's a good paragraph, can only talk about why he or she likes science and math. I mean, the person can't talk about, oh, I also like sports in school. Sports wouldn't be covered by that first sentence, would it? So that first sentence is going to control what the idea is. And the idea is going to be, I favored science and math. I didn't like courses like English. Now, the person in the next sentence explains a little bit more. So this is how you construct a paragraph. You made that first statement. Now let's explain it a little more, okay? What does it mean? My instinct was always to think of these subjects as more solid and serious, that is science and math, than classes like English. Okay, so that explains that first sentence, doesn't it? I always thought of science and math as being more solid, I don't quite know what that means, and serious than classes like English. So the person really thinks that English isn't serious, I guess. That's why he or she doesn't like it. Let's explain it a little more, why you feel that way, okay? If there was no right answer, and often in English when you're writing an essay, there isn't a right or wrong answer. If there was no right answer, I thought, why bother? That is, there are certain areas like when you read a novel, you watch a movie, you could interpret it yourself, and there'd be many different interpretations. Your friends might have a different way of looking at it. And that's why this person doesn't like it. If there are no right answers, I thought, why bother? Now, so you can see though how each sentence explained the sentence before it. I've always favored subjects like science and math. My instinct is that they're more serious than English. If there's no right answer, who cares? Now, but recently I had an experience that taught me my academic interests are more flexible than I had thought. I took my first philosophy class. Okay, so the person now says, I'm trying something new. Okay, now what's the next paragraph? Before I entered the classroom, I was skeptical. And skeptical means what? A little suspicious, not sure of what's going to happen, kind of doubtful about how good things are going to be. Let's look at that again. Before I entered the classroom. Now, can you see where that's sort of an introductory phrase? It's sort of, so it has a comma, because there's a little pause there, isn't there? If you read that, before I entered the classroom, there's a natural pause. So you put a comma there. I was skeptical. So the rest of this has to be about why this person was worried. Again, you can't start talking about how I really love my parents. That doesn't fit under that. I waited outside with the other students and wondered what exactly philosophy would involve. Okay. I really had no idea. That's very honest, isn't it? I had no idea. I imagined some pretty abstract, that means you're not concrete, abstract, something pretty abstract. Now, when you want to put a little list of a few things, often you use a semi or a full colon like that. So what is it that this person imagined? Long, stilted conversations, pondering the meaning of life. But what I got was something quite different. So again, the first topic sentence is, I'm skeptical. I was waiting with the other students. We were all skeptical. I had no idea what was going to happen. But whatever I thought was going to happen, it didn't happen. what I got was something quite different. So let's go to the next sentence, the next paragraph. A young man in jeans, Mr. Jones, was far from the white-haired, buttoned-up old man I had half expected. Let's go back to that again. A young man in jeans, comma, Mr. Jones, comma, was far from the white-haired, buttoned-up old man I had half expected. Why are there commas around Mr. Jones? Think of this. This is a rule that you're going to use almost with everything you write. If there's part of a sentence that you can take out that doesn't affect the meaning, then put commas around it. Okay, so they call that a non-restrictive clause. I don't want to use a lot of technical terms, but just think about it. If there's some part of a sentence that if you removed it, it wouldn't really change the meaning of the sentence. So let's say we removed Mr. Jones, just for the sake of argument, okay? A young man in jeans was far from the white-haired, buttoned-up old man I had half expected. The content of the sentence is the same, isn't it? It's the same meaning. So because you could take out that Mr. Jones, you're going to put commas around it. Now, he was far from the white-haired, buttoned-up old man I had half expected. White-haired. When do you use a mark like that, a hyphen? When two words come together with one meaning, you use the hyphen. Like either one of those words, white or haired, wouldn't make sense by itself, would it? That is, a man in young jeans was far from the white old man? No. The haired old man? No. Those two words come together, and if they come together and form one unit, one word really, then you have to use a hyphen. So he was from the white-haired, now buttoned up. That means really conservative. But again, it's those two words come together with one meaning. Buttoned up means conservative. Okay. Either one by itself wouldn't make sense. Old man, I had half expected. Any questions so far about what we've been talking about? So now this is going to be this paragraph about Mr. Jones, who is in jeans. He's not, formally dressed. He doesn't seem like a very boring person. Okay. Rather than pulling us into pedantic arguments, does anyone know the meaning of the word pedantic?
Oh, I think Gabrielle have a question. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, please, yes, go ahead, right ahead, Gabrielle. Gabrielle.
I was gonna say pedantic means like nerdy.
Yeah, very scholarly.
Also, I had a question.
Yeah, go right ahead, Gabrielle.
Earlier when you were like saying like when you can leave out the words in commas, what kind of clause is it called?
Okay, it's a very technical word, and you can write it down if you want, because it happens all the time. It's called a N-O-N, and then a hyphen, restrictive clause. Now, what does restrictive mean? If your parents restrict you, you can't go out on a Saturday night. If there are rules at school that restrict you from clothes that you wear, it means limiting you, right? Restrictive means limiting. So this type of clause is a non-limiting. That is, it doesn't limit anything. It doesn't limit the meaning of the sentence. And that's why if you can take it out, if it's sort of non-restrictive, if it doesn't change anything, then you can take it out. But good question, though. Good question. And pedantic, yeah. Pedantic is kind of scholarly, but in a nerdy way. You're right. And here it's a negative word, isn't it? That is, the student thought I was going to hear a lot of really abstract, difficult arguments to follow, very scholarly, because that's what you would think. Maybe this person, going to a philosophy class, not really knowing what philosophy was. So he says, rather than, though, that didn't happen, pulling up us into pedantic arguments about obscure philosophical points, Rob, as he wanted to be called, engaged us on our level. Okay, now think of that, as he wanted to be called. If that were removed, would that change anything? Arguments about obscure philosophical points. Rob engaged us on his level or on our level. I mean, it doesn't limit anything. It's just sort of added information. Why it's nice sometimes to have that there, though, is that it makes your writing more interesting. it's like, it makes it a little fuller. But why you would use commas there is that if you took that out, nothing would change, correct? Rob engaged us on our level. To talk free will. Okay, now free will is a fairly abstract, idea. We looked at our own choices. Like I choose to do this, I don't choose to do that. That's an exercise of free will. To talk ethics, we looked at the dilemmas we had faced ourselves. Whether I should, do this or that. Is this moral? Is that not moral? By the end of the class, again, a little introductory clause, right? By the end of the class, your voice naturally pauses there, so it's going to be a comma. There's no rule for that really, but if it's a few words that sort of introduce the sentence, and your voice naturally pauses there, put a comma there. I discovered that questions with no right answer can turn out to be the most interesting ones. That's interesting, isn't it? Because it goes back to that first paragraph. Remember, this person thought, I'm not going to like English because there are no right answers. There are no right or wrong answers, so I'm not going to like it. Now the person discovers that those questions that don't have a right answer or one answer can turn out to be the most interesting ones. And I think that's very true, because they are, yes and no questions, black and white questions are fairly direct and simple. It's those questions where you have a lot of gray in there that become interesting. And Sophie, good luck to whatever you're going to be doing. Okay, the experience has taught me to look at things a little more philosophically. Puts quotation marks around that because it's kind of a pun. Remember, the person is talking about philosophy class, and philosophically then means I'm sort of stoical about it, and not just because it was a philosophy class. I learned that if I let go of my preconceptions, and what are preconceptions? Anyone what a preconception is? Do you ever have go ahead, Gabrielle.
Like preconceived thoughts.
Right, before you ever, right, they are thoughts. Before you ever see what it is you're going to see, okay, you think what you're going to see. You have an idea of what you're going to see, even though you haven't seen it. And that's what preconceived means. That is, before I met the person, I didn't think I was going to like them. Before I went to that place, whatever it was, a party, wherever I went, before I went there, I didn't think I was going to like it. That's preconceived. That is, you're making up your mind before you ever see the evidence. And usually that's bad, by the way. Because as that's the point of this little essay, that keep an open mind. Don't make up your mind that you're going to dislike something from a preconceived idea of what English is like, or a preconceived idea of what history is like, or a preconceived idea of what a person is like. So, and so that's a good thing to avoid anyway. I learned that if I let go of my preconceptions, I can actually get a lot out of subjects I was previously dismissive of. And that is true. If you walk into an experience or to a classroom or to a course with blinders on, you're looking very narrowly at something, you're going to dismiss a lot of what's very interesting. The class taught me, in more ways than one, to look at things with an open mind. Isn't that a nice conclusion? Isn't that last sentence really what the whole essay is about? The class taught me, in more ways than one could be taken out. Wouldn't really make that much difference, I don't think. But the class taught me to look at things with an open mind. And it seems to me that is what, from the very first, sentence, it was about whether his mind or her mind is going to be open or not. The very first sentence says, I have a closed mind. I like science and math. I don't like the humanities. Well, I don't know what the humanities are. I don't know what philosophy is. That's a terrible preconception to make when you're saying, I don't like humanities and I don't even know what they are. And at the end it says, the class taught me to look at things with an open mind. Any remarks about that? I think it's a pretty good essay, don't you? Why is it good? Well, it's logical, isn't it? It flowed. One paragraph led to the next, to the next. There was a logical progression in it. And did you notice too that you didn't have to ask about what he meant or she meant in any sentence? I don't know if a male or a female wrote this, a boy or girl, but you notice that you didn't have to say, well, I wonder what he means by that, or I wonder what she means by that. Every sentence was what I call concrete. You knew what it was about. It wasn't vague. It wasn't something that is sort of unclear. Everything was stated very clear. I mean, every sentence, it seems to me, is very understandable if you look at each sentence just by itself. So what do you think? Okay, well, let's go to the next one. And I guess you're going to have to, it won't be on the screen, so look at your own. I'll be reading, okay, good. It's called A Teeny Tiny Treasure Box. And again, it's a narrative essay because it's concerned about a personal story. And in a way, it's a lovely story, also a little sad story, because I think the girl here is an orphan who hasn't been adopted. And she's 15, and the older you get as an orphan, the less likely it is that you're going to be adopted. And so it's sad, but yet it has a happy ending that she finds a happy family. But let's look at it. Good title, Teeny Tiny Treasure Box. So at the very end, the moral is going to be a little note that's in a tiny box. He took me by the hand and walked me into the lobby like a 5-year-old child. A clear sentence, right? We don't know who the she is, we will soon, but she took me by the hand and walked me into the lobby like a 5-year-old child. What makes for good writing? That is very vivid, isn't it? You can imagine exactly what she is saying. She didn't say she took me into the lobby like a child, but it's a 5-year-old child. And she walked me. I didn't just appear there. And it was a lobby. It wasn't outside of a building. It wasn't in a bedroom or a kitchen. It was a lobby. So, I mean, I think there's lovely detail there that we like as readers. We like to see the scene in our mind. And I think in this essay, you actually can. She took me by the hand and walked me into the lobby like a 5-year-old child. So, this girl is feeling a little peeved that she's being treated as a child. Didn't she know I was pushing 15? I mean, can you imagine how frustrating it is to be treated like a 5-year-old when you're pushing 15? This was the third home Nancy was placing me in over the span of 8 months. How sad. These are foster homes. And she's going to the third one. Nancy is that person who took her by the hand. This is the third one she's been in the 8 months. I mean, how disruptive, how impermanent that is. How that must wear someone down, wear their spirits down. I guess she felt a little sorry for me. Well, yeah, I mean, that's a nice sentence, isn't it? Yeah, that Nancy knows this isn't good either. The bright fluorescent lights threatened to burn my skin as I walked towards a bouncing looking lady with curly hair and a sweetly smiling man. Now that's a great sentence, but why is it good? Let's go back. Bright fluorescent lights. Okay, she could have said just the lights, right? But what does bright fluorescent lights do? It gives you more detail. You can see it, can't you? We've all seen fluorescent lights that were a little bright and we had to almost shade our eyes because it's too bright. And so you actually can see that with those adjectives, a bright fluorescent light, not just a light. And it threatened, I mean, like it's a threat to burn my skin. That's how hot the fluorescent light looked or was, that it threatened to burn my skin as I walked towards a bouncing looking lady. Now, isn't that a lovely description? Not just a lady. I mean, most people would have written, I walked toward a lady, well, or I walked toward a pleasant lady or a smiling lady. But this is better. Bouncy looking. Isn't that a great term? That is that she's jovial, maybe vivacious, bouncing up and down a little bit, excited. Maybe her face is excited. Maybe she's moving her arms. But I think we can help envision that. We can see good writing. You can envision it. It's creating us a place, a specific place for us to look at. That's right. This is a bouncing looking lady, which I think is very positive, with curly hair, not just hair, but curly hair. So we get more, it's another great adjective, isn't it? By the way, this is what you do when you revise an essay. The first time through, probably the second time through an essay, it's not going to sound like this. You're not going to have words like bouncy looking or curly hair. That comes after you have the basics of the essay down. You have the basic descriptions down. Then you ask yourself, how can I make that more realistic? How can I make that more exciting? And you come up with curly hair. and a sweetly smiling man. Not just a nice man or an old man, but sweetly smiling. And those two words come together, sweetly smiling, so they're hyphenated. But isn't that a great description of the people she's walking toward? And you immediately like them. Good writing doesn't have to tell you something. It shows you something. It shows you what those people are like because she's bouncy looking and he's sweetly smiling. They call themselves Allie and Alex. Cute, I thought. They're cute little people. I mean, she's almost being superior there. Okay. After they exchange the usual reams of paperwork, right, because she's going to be a foster child, so they have to sign a million forms, it was off in their Chevy Suburban to get situated into another new home. Now, it was off in their Chevy Suburban. Isn't that wonderful? And just saying it, rather than saying it was off in their car, you have an idea of what it looks like. It gives you a sense of realism, doesn't it? To get situated into another new home. And so everything, by the way, that's the topic sentence. We're going to get situated into a new home. So everything in that paragraph has to follow that. This time, there were no other foster children and no other biological children. Anything could happen. So there's a little phrase, anything could happen, that kind of, it gives us something to anticipate that something is going to happen. But look at that first sentence was, we got into another new home, and then the next sentence is about that home. There are no other children there. Over the next few weeks, Allie, Alex, and I fell into quite a nice routine. Okay, so what does the rest of that paragraph have to talk about? Their nice routine, right? It can't suddenly talk about that it's storming outside and the roof had a leak. It suddenly can't talk about they threw me out for another child. It suddenly can't talk about I was in a car accident. I mean, everything in that paragraph now has to be about how they fell into a nice routine. Now, what is that routine? She made pancakes for breakfast. Or he'd fry up some sausage and eggs. That's part of the routine, a very nice routine, right? But we know she didn't just say, oh, she made breakfast, but she made pancakes and he did sausage and eggs, specific, detailed. They sang a lot, even danced as they cooked. Wow. I mean, what a nice routine that is. They must have just bought the house because on most weekends we were painting a living room butter yellow or staining a coffee table mocha brown, that is staining a coffee table the color of mocha brown. So that's the routine, right? Breakfast, what the breakfast was, sang and danced, painted the living room, painted coffee tables. That all would come under the idea of a nice routine, that first sentence. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. That's an expression, most of you probably know what that means. It means when something, if there are a couple of bad things that are going to happen, and only one of them has happened, I'm going to wait for the next one to happen. I'm going to wait for the other shoe to drop. The first shoe dropped, it was bad. I got thrown off the team. The second shoe I'm waiting for is I'm going to be expelled from school. So I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. That is this for real? Is this just phony? So the rest of the paragraph has to be about that. Is this just a phony experience? When would they start threatening a loss of pancakes if I didn't mow the lawn? Right? That would not be a very pleasant house. She thinks, is that going to happen? When would the sausage and eggs be replaced, but with unidentifiable slush because he didn't feel like cooking in the morning? Oh, so I'm afraid that all this goodwill is going to go away. So again, I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, but it never happened. They kept cooking, singing, and dancing like a couple of happy fools. Fools usually isn't a good term, but there I think it is because they're happy fools. And people generally don't sing and dance, but more power to people who can do that. It seems to me that's a very happy way to do things. Okay, it was a Saturday afternoon when Allie decided it was time to paint the brick fireplace white. Okay, so now that's the controlling sentence, right? The topic sentence. We have to talk now about the brick fireplace. We can't talk about the upstairs bedroom, can we? We can't talk about the Chevy car. We have to talk about this. As we crawled closer, So you think of it as it's a brick fireplace. You all know what that is. They want to paint it white. As we crawled closer to the dirty old fire pit, we pulled out the petrified wood and noticed a teeny tiny treasure box. Petrified wood is wood that has been there a long, long time. It's dried up so that it's almost like stone now. Like in Arizona, you have the petrified forest in Arizona where you have trees that have become like stones. So we got closer to the fire pit. We pulled out a piece of old wood because we're going to paint it. We get rid of the old wood. And what did we notice? There was hidden there a teeny tiny treasure box. Isn't that a beautiful phrase, by the way? All of them start with T's. Teeny tiny treasure box. It's nice to say it. It sounds nice when you say those words. But again, it's an example of good writing. It didn't just happen by accident. We looked at each other in wonder and excitement. What is this? A treasure? She actually said, I wonder if the leprechauns left it. Now, do you know what leprechauns are? Anyone? How would you define a leprechaun? Something that is like a spirit. They're not real. Every society has these little creatures, gnomes. In some societies, leprechauns are in Irish society. They're little spirits from the spirit world, like fairies. And what she's saying is she knows they don't exist, but I wonder if that's how it came about, that some leprechaun left it, because I don't know how it got there. Well, judging her for being such a silly woman, I couldn't help but laugh and lean into her a little. That's because she is kind of silly and fun, and goofy. I like her, so I leaned into her a little. Isn't that a great way of saying it? See, here, the writer isn't saying I started to like her. The writer does not say those words, I'm starting to like her. But when you read lean into her a little, that's what it means, isn't it? Don't you get the sense that the girl is sort of leaning closer to the woman, so that the woman could put her arm around her, or at least be closer? See, good writing doesn't have to tell you this happened. It shows you it happened with the wording. Together, we reached for the box and pulled it out. Okay, so it has to be about the box now, right? Can't now start talking about upstairs bedroom, cars. Inside was a shimmering solitaire ring. Solitaire means by itself, like solitary confinement. But shimmering means shining. Isn't that a wonderful word? But again, this person is using adjectives to help us imagine the scene. So the writer didn't say it's just a nice ring, a round ring, a diamond ring. It's a shimmering solitaire ring. Folded underneath was a short piece of paper that read. And so there's a piece of paper that is in this little box. And if you're going to quote something, like quote what someone has said, in this case, quoting what is on that little piece of paper, you can use a full colon or sometimes a comma, but you have to have some punctuation mark to introduce the quotation. So it can be a full colon or a comma. That's your choice. Hold it underneath this short piece of paper that read, my darling, my heart, only 80 days have passed since I first held your hand. Will you build a life with me? This tiny little solitary is my offering to you. Will you be my bride? So what they found in that tiny box was a love note from a man who fell in love with a woman and wants to ask her to marry him. And probably we don't know that story. We don't know what happened, but I assume that maybe, that did happen, that she did marry him, because it seems like such a lovely gesture. It turns out that love comes in all shapes and sizes, even in a teeny tiny treasure box from a wonderfully silly lady who believed in leprechauns. So what is the point then of the story? The point is that love comes in many different shapes. I don't know if you know the movie a couple of years ago, The Shape of Water. It was an interesting movie, but it was sort of about the same thing, that water doesn't have a shape, does it? Water takes on the shape of whatever is containing it, right? So water can be the shape of a square, it can be round, something round is containing it. It can be tall and thin. something like water, and let's think of water as love, can take on many shapes. And here it is taking on, this person, the writer, reflects that it can come in all types of shapes. This isn't a big celebration that this man did. He didn't buy her a new car, have a huge engagement party. He didn't take her on a fabulous vacation, take her out to an expensive dinner. The love came in a teeny tiny treasure box. That was the shape of it. And the lady, she's wonderfully silly, but again, wonderfully, because she still believes in leprechauns, which is just nice. I think it's a nice reference taking us back to the lady saying leprechauns. Give me your impressions of this. Give me your impressions of why, if you liked it especially, why did you like it? Why is it good? If you didn't like it, why didn't you like it? Anyone, there are no right or wrong answers for this. It's wholesome and descriptive. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's very descriptive, isn't it? You know how I felt when I was reading it? I wish it didn't end. I would love to have it go on some more, because I was really enjoying the story. But can you see why we call it a narrative? It is about this person. It is a personal experience. No one else experienced this, just this girl that's writing it, this young woman who's writing it. And it has a very, I think, interesting point to it, very telling point to it. Some more reasons why you liked it or not. Didn't it flow well? I mean, were there any parts that you don't understand? But haven't you all read some things, maybe written by a writer or written by a classmate, where you just don't understand what the person is saying? It's just too vague, or it isn't concrete enough for me really to know exactly what you mean. So you have to write back and say, well, what do you mean by that? You don't have to do that with any of this. It seems to me everything is concretely known. It's all explained. Her fears, that the other shoe was going to drop, but it never did. That these people generally were nice. I assume what that means too is that, what was this? This was the third time in 8 months that she's gone to have someone interview her for adoption or for foster care. That she must have been disappointed with those people. That maybe they were very fine and nice at first, but then they turned out to be terrible. And so she's skeptical. She's waiting for the other shoe to drop. Is this just surface? Is this just too good to be true? Is this just somebody pulling my leg, that they're really not that nice? How could anyone be so nice as to dance when they're cooking? And it turns out that, they are that nice. I mean, what a positive essay. Something else, anything else about it? Well, let's look at the next one. We might not have time to get all the way through it, but let's see what we can do. The grass is always greener. We might not be able to get through all of it, but you can finish it pretty much, because it's a little longer than the rest. Again, it's a narrative essay. It talks about this man who doesn't know where to live, doesn't know where he wants to live. He's probably a little older, but maybe in his late teens, early 20s. And the expression "the grass is always greener" means that somewhere else is always better than where I am. Someone else cooks better than my mother cooks. Someone else is better off than I am, or wherever I am isn't as good as some other place, and it's almost always false. The grass isn't always greener. Okay, so he says, I like the saying. Now, since it's a saying, he has to put it in quotation marks. Okay, so I like the saying, the grass is always greener on the other side. So he introduces it with a full colon, or you say could use a comma. To me, it means we tend to believe life in places different from our residence is for some reason better. Considering this, I have tried to be content with the place I resided in throughout my life, a regular city in the center of the United States. Due to various circumstances, however, that would take too much time to describe here, I started to think about changing my life and moving to another area. To start with, now that's a little introductory phrase, right? To start with, so you put a little comma after it. I attempted to figure out where I wanted to live in all sincerity. I don't know if you need that remark in all sincerity. I don't think it adds much to that sentence because we assume the person is being sincere. And while living, so he's, listen, he's going to talk about a city. While living in a city, I discovered that perhaps the most irritating factor for me was the rush and the amounts of unnecessary information. Now, he makes a little mistake there. While living in a city, I discovered that perhaps the most irritating factors, because there are two factors there, right? Was the rush, hustle and bustle, the rush, and the amounts of information I'm being bombarded with. There are two. It isn't just one factor. So it should be that should be plural. And so what does that first sentence say? Why I don't like a city, it's irritating, is because of the rush of the people and the amounts of information that I'm always getting. So that rest of that paragraph then has to be about those two things, right? Not just about one of them, but both of them. And it can't be about, well, I don't like the rain in cities because it's messy. Well, no, he never mentioned the rain in cities because in that opening sentence. So it has to, that sentence controls a paragraph. Let's see how he does that. Every morning, I witness crowds of people hurrying, having quick snacks while leaping from one office to another, glancing at their watches frantically. So there you have that hustle and bustle, don't you? And isn't it a good term there? A couple of good words. I witness crowds of people hurrying, having quick snacks while leaping. Leaping is a great word there, isn't it? From one office to another. I think of a kangaroo or some animal that jumps up in the air and leaps from one place to another. Humans don't leap, but it makes you feel like you're watching animals jump up and down, or kangaroos leaping from one office to another. He doesn't say quick snacks while going from one office to another. Most of us would have said going from one office to another. But again, he thought, well, is there a better way of saying it? And leaping is a much better word. I think we'll have to admit that. But again, this happens maybe your third time through revising it. Remember, writing is a process of writing and rewriting and rewriting and rewriting. And every time you rewrite something, I can assure you this, it'll get tighter. You'll put in much better vocabulary, much more lively words. The writing will become better. Because our mind can only do so much at one time. And you go through it a couple of times, then it gets good. Okay, so let's go back to where we were. Every morning, I witness crowds of people having quick snacks while leaping from one office to another, glancing at their watches frantically. Frantically makes that work, doesn't it? Glancing at their watches. Well, if it weren't frantically weren't there, they would just be glancing at their watches. But frantically makes it sound like that hustle and bustle, doesn't it? It makes it sound like something that is exaggerated. That is happening too fast, the hustle and bustle. Okay, so that covers the hustle and bustle part of the topic sentence, right? I don't like the rush. And now, remember, he also said on that topic sentence, that first sentence, information. Every day, again, that's a little introduction, right? Every day, comma, I see placards, posters, billboards, TV commercials, and advertising products I had completely no need for. Well, there you get that idea that I'm being bombarded with information. I'm being deluged with information that I don't want, I don't need. And that happens to all of us, doesn't it? I mean, most of the stuff that is just thrown at us, we don't really care about. The ads we pop up on Facebook or stuff we just get on the internet, and you have no control over it. So I have no need for, I don't like that, he says, in the city. There's just too much information that is irrelevant. There was no escape from it because commercials were seemingly everywhere. They really are, aren't they? They're in search engines, in my mailbox, in YouTube clips, and in every printed or electronic material. Why is that sentence good? Again, he shows us what he is saying. He shows us. There was no escape from it, okay? There's no escape from the commercials. They're everywhere. Okay, you could have stopped there, right? Because commercials are seemingly everywhere in search engines. He could have put us, or conceivably everywhere. What if he said there was no escape from it because commercials were seemingly everywhere, period? That would be a perfectly fine sentence, and we'd understand what he meant. But think of how much better it is when he gives us some examples. So So and again, when you're going to make a little list, you use a full colon. Where are those ads? Well, they're in search engines, in my mailbox, in YouTube clips, and in every printed or electronic material. That is wonderful examples of what he's talking about. Whenever I browsed on the internet, and by the way, internet is a capital I. It's an organization. It's a specific business. Whenever I browsed on the internet, capital I, for information on topics of interest, I had to wade through tons of informational garbage. True, isn't it? You know, I mean, sometimes it's so hard when you Google something to find the topic because there's so many other, lines there, Google ads that want to divert you. And what is it? I have to go through tons of garbage. I love that term. Not just information, not just ads, but it's garbage. That's why, and go back to that first topic sentence, that's why I hate the city. Now, he has started for the quote again. The place I choose to live will be calm and won't cause me stress, I said to myself, and kept on thinking. Now, if you're talking, what he is talking, he's saying what he's thinking in his mind, what he's saying to himself. So it would be put in quotation marks, because this is what he is saying to himself, even though he doesn't say it to someone else. From my early childhood, I loved mountains. Can you see again why the comma is there? From my early childhood, it introduces, the whole idea of the sentence. I loved mountains. When I was taken to the Yellowstone National Park by my parents for the first time, I was literally shocked by the greatness of nature and the amazing feeling of freedom and height. Again, nice specific detail, right? And I was shocked. Not just I noticed, but I was just so surprised, even beyond surprise. I was shocked by how great nature is, by the size of it. And I had not just a feeling, but an amazing feeling of freedom and height. Since that time, I kept on visiting Yellowstone annually. Wow. I have also traveled to several mountainous regions of the US and Europe. Now, there's an interesting piece of punctuation there that I want you to be able to master, and you will master it by the time we're finished. It's a semicolon. Okay. Since that time, that's a little introductory phrase, right? So it's a comma. I kept on visiting Yellowstone annually, semicolon. I have also traveled to several mountainous regions of the United States and Europe. Now, we're going to have to repeat this a number of times, which is okay, because it's easy to sort of forget this or to fall back into the mistake. When you have a short sentence and then another short sentence after it, okay, and you want to link those two, you could do it by saying comma and. But if you're not going to use a conjunction, now and is a conjunction, but is a conjunction, for is a conjunction, since is a conjunction. Let's say that you don't want to use those. If you don't use those and you're linking two, what they call independent clauses, that is two sentences, think that each can stand by itself. Each one has to be able to stand by itself as a legitimate sentence. If you're linking the two and you're not using and or but or, then you can use a semicolon. I'm going to point this out to you a lot because it's such a lovely piece of punctuation. It pulls two things together. First of all, it's interesting because you don't want to always use and or but it also pulls two ideas together, closer together. So let's look at that again. Let's see if it meets our criteria. Since that time, I kept on visiting Yellowstone annually. What if there was a period right there? Okay, that's a perfect sentence. Since that time, I kept on visiting Yellowstone annually. So I is the subject, right? Kept on is the verb, or kept on visiting, it's the verb. What did I visit? What's the object? Yellowstone. And you have an adverb, annually. So it's a perfectly grammatical sentence, right? Now, let's look at the next part. I have also traveled to several mountainous regions of the US and Europe. Let's assume that just stood by itself. That's also a perfect sentence. I, the subject, have also traveled, the verb, where? To mountains, the object, mountainous regions of the US and Europe. So can you see how both of those could stand independently of each other if we could put a period after annually, couldn't we? Since that time, I kept on visiting annually. And I suspect when you first write it, that's probably what it would be. You probably would put a period there. Then you write the next sentence. I have also traveled to several mountainous regions of the US and Europe. Well, let's put those two together. It makes for a more interesting sentence. But again, we need then the semicolon. That's the only piece of punctuation you can use there. That is when you're joining two sentences without using and, but, or, without using conjunctions. When you're joining two sentences together, they each have to be independent sentences, then you use the semicolon. And what if we didn't want to use the semicolon, we wanted to use a comma and use and? It would be, since that time, I kept on visiting Yellowstone annually, comma, and I have also traveled to several mountainous regions of the US and Europe. That's a perfectly good sentence. You don't use the semicolon, use comma and. That's fine. What you don't want to do, though, is to use the semicolon and also use and. That would have been a mistake. Or if you didn't put in any kind of punctuation there, neither a semicolon or a comma, that would be a mistake. So can you get that idea? Because you're gonna like that when you start to use semicolons, because you can put two things. You know what it seems like to me? Like a teeter-totter, where both sentences are balancing each other, and the teeter-totter, the middle of that teeter-totter or seesaw, is that semicolon. So on the one side you have, I kept visiting Yellowstone. On the other side, I kept visiting mountains in the United States. Boom, I did one thing, I did the other. Is that kind of clear? You're not going to remember it. I know we're going to come back to it again and again, probably in every session. But it's a great piece of punctuation. And one of the most common mistakes in grammar, in punctuation, they call it the comma splice. It is when they put in and there without a comma, or they put in a comma, in this case, instead of a semicolon. That is one of the most common grammatical mistakes. If they had just after annually put a comma, it would be wrong. Or if they just put the semicolon and also and, it would be wrong. Every time I was walking up or standing on top of a mountain, I wondered, do people living in such places have the same problems as city dwellers? Good question. Can a person who can witness the enormous misty mountain silhouettes in their windows each morning really be miserable and petty? It's a good question to answer. But isn't the idea that from your window, you look out the window and it's misty, the mountains are misty, and your window is probably misty too. And there are little silhouettes out there of trees and mountains. Listen, I want to do something. You can finish the rest of this. We're not going to have a chance to do that. But just look at it yourself. I want to go to the next assignment so it's clear before we leave. Can I get to, Now, for the next class, I want you to write a narrative essay. And I hope you know how to send that to Google Classroom or to Morgan as our assistant. Now, remember, a narrative essay is one that tells a story like we've just seen. This is usually a story about a person or experience you had, but you got to make a point. That is, there has to be some point to the story. Why am I telling you this story? Well, I discovered something about myself, that I was narrow-minded, or that I was unkind, or that I was prejudiced. I mean, I'm telling you, I learned something about me or life. Okay, and again, let's make it between, I mean, I really don't really care that much about the words. I'm not like, I just want to give you an idea though. I mean, I'm not going to count the words, and if you want to write a little less or a little more, that's fine. But let's say, just so you get an idea, 350 to 400 words, that's a little more than a page, like a typewritten page. Now, the due date would be midnight, October 27th. Now, October 27th, I think, is this Wednesday. And I hope we can, and I'll go over your papers very carefully, correct them, critique them line by line. I'll suggest in those, in my critiquing of them or editing of them, what was wrong and what was good. I mean, both things. And again, we have to accept, any kind of criticism in the manner in which it's intended, that we want to all improve. We're all here to get better at what we do. So I'll critique those papers and send them back to Google Class or some way that you can get them so you can read them before the next session. Okay. Then we'll look at some of them online anonymously. No one will know who wrote it. But one way of getting to be good at something is to have friends who are doing the same thing, your peers, critique what you're doing. Say, yeah, that was really good. I don't know if any of you play in any musical groups, but oftentimes then, musicians will play and for their friends, and their friends will say, yeah, that was really good. I like that, but this wasn't loud enough, or that was good. It's how we improve by having people look at what we do and respond to what we do. Now, tell me questions about what you have to do for the next class. And I don't want this to be laborious. I don't want this to be something that you really hate doing. I want it to be fun. So think of something that happened to you that you think is actually interesting. And drawing a moral is usually not very hard, because most of the things we do in life, they do teach us something. And so what we have to do here is just make that explicit, what it teaches us. And in the one case it was that the grass is always greener. And in another case that I had an open mind. I didn't have an open mind. Now, what we've done so far today, are there questions about it? Questions about, and in the future too, we're going to go to the grammar book, the one that I created for you, and look at just typical mistakes. And we all make them. And believe me, I've had students use this little booklet for 20 years, and they didn't have to use anything else in college or in the workplace because I have some examples of what they were looking for, and it's much easier to find that in a 14-page booklet than in a big grammar book. Observations, questions about what we've read. How do you feel about writing? Do you enjoy it, or do you feel like what they call writer's block? I just can't think of anything to write about. I just can't think of something. That's why I want you to use that method of looking at the computer and not worrying about your spelling or your typing or grammar, and just call up all that information you have on every topic. I mean, you know a lot about everything. You just don't know you know a lot about it. It's there. But to give yourself the time to call it up, it might take 10, 15, 20 minutes, but the idea will pop into your mind and you'll jot it down on the screen. And then another idea will pop up, you jot it down on the screen. And that becomes really the outline of what you are saying, what you're going to write about. You put those together in a rough draft, and then you go over it again and really, fine tune it like those students did in those essays that we just read. So questions about writing, about how you feel about writing? Do you enjoy writing? Anyone? Well, so we have a few minutes. Maybe I can do this. Morgan, could you go back to that last essay? Maybe I can look a little bit more, and maybe get another paragraph in for the grass is always greener. Thank you. Thank you, Morgan. Well, where were we? Okay. It says, can a person who witnesses the enormous musty mountains, be miserable? Mountains, that is where I need to live, I said to myself. But again, since he's saying it to himself, it's like dialogue, so you put it in quotation marks, and kept on looking with my belief. I was making my decision for a couple more months. During this period, that's a little introductory phrase, right? During this period, you pause a little bit, put the comma. I made solid efforts to recall the most pleasant memories about places I have been to, and to realize my needs concerning a way of life, occupation, communication, geographical location, and so on. I find that sentence a little confusing, frankly. I think you try to put too much into it, maybe a little too many ideas. Like I made efforts to recall the most pleasant memories I remember, and then he talks about his needs concerning a way of life and concerning an occupation and communication and geographical location. I kind of get lost with what he's saying. What are his needs concerning a way of life and occupation? And so on doesn't tell me anything. That's just sort of a catch-all phrase, isn't it? Like etc. Don't use etc. in your writing. I would stop on a certain selection as the final one, and the next day I would reconsider it. Now, see, there you have those two sentences, right? With a comma. I would stop on a certain selection as the final one. We could put a period right there, right? Now, the next day I would reconsider it. It's a short sentence, but it's a sentence. And now we're using and, so we put a comma. That's each of those phrases or clauses could stand as independent sentences. They're being joined by and, so you use the comma. What will we do if we didn't want to use the comma? You could put a semicolon there, just remove and, right? I would stop on a certain selection as the final one, semicolon. The next day I would reconsider it. Actually, I think the semicolon works better there, don't you think? It doesn't sort of put the comparison. I would stop one day, I would reconsider it. I think you get that kind of balance with the semicolon. Among the places I thought of were Italy, Norway, Peru. He really has covered the world, and even exotic countries for a Westerner to live in, such as China and Nepal. After a period of intense consideration, not just consideration, but intense consideration, good adjective, right? However, I finally stopped searching and chose Scotland. It looked exactly like what I needed. Mountainous regions, nice people, suitable climate, well, suitable for me at least, since the weather is fickle, the English language being spoken, and both modern civilization and countless opportunities for seclusion and resort. I don't like that, especially that sentence. To me, again, he's trying to put a little too much in it. I finally stopped searching and chose Scotland. Okay, now why did you choose Scotland? Okay, it has mountainous regions, it has nice people, good climate. But then he goes on, and they speak English, and they have modern civilization and opportunities for seclusion. I think he's trying to pack maybe too much into that one sentence. Now, the country also has lots of green grass. See, to me, we need an ending, don't we? We don't have a sense of closure, do we? Let's think of ending essays two ways. You can just end something, just stop writing. That's not what you want to do. You want to get a sense of closure. That is a sense of drawing everything together. And this is why I did what I did. This is what I learned about myself. And you want to have a sense of pulling stuff together. To me, the essay just stops there. And I want more. I want to know, well, what about? So it has green grass. So what? What is your real conclusion? Do you share that is not a great ending? That doesn't really pull things together very well? What do you think? Might want to do on your own, write an ending for this. I mean, write another paragraph for it. That after visiting the world, I ended up loving Scotland because of it doesn't have a lot of ads, doesn't have a lot of hustle bustle. Remember we talked about that. It has mountains. It's beautiful. And I think I can love the lifestyle. I mean, something like that to sort of summarize his feelings. But to me, that the country has lots of grass, green grass. I don't know. It just stops. Well, what do you think about that? Well, anyway, in the hour, 7 o'clock, and I don't want to keep you up too long. So again, do that essay. Don't make it work. Make it pleasure. Really try to enjoy the experience. Think about an experience you've had, and don't make this like a difficult assignment. I want all of our classes to be pleasant. I want you to not worry about them. I want to have fun in them. I don't want to bore you, and we'll have lots of material to cover. And thank you for joining us. This was really, really great. And like I say, we'll make a lot of progress. And I hope that you think about some of these things that we've talked about, and that's how you make them part of your own life. So thank you very much, students.